My wife, Olivia, went away for a while, supposedly for work. She told me it was an important business trip, and I didn't think much about it. Work stuff, nothing unusual, you know how it goes. When she came back after some time, something caught my attention right away. Her stomach looked different, like she'd gained a little weight, but it was just in that area. It wasn't all over, just her belly, and it stood out in a noticeable way. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she just indulged a bit more than usual while she was away. But the longer I looked, the stranger it seemed. It's been bothering me ever since, and now I want to lay everything out for you, step by step. I often find myself thinking back to the simpler days when life felt easy, and our relationship was full of shared dreams and laughter. Olivia and I used to spend hours on the porch of our home in Austin, Texas, sipping coffee and imagining our future together. We were young, ambitious, and always found time for each other, no matter how busy we got. But over the years, our careers started to take over, overshadowing the connection we once had. We ignored the growing distance, focusing on chasing promotions and meeting deadlines. Now, it feels like we're living separate lives, struggling to find our way back to each other. This growing unease has been gnawing at me, and I just can't shake it. Not long ago, Olivia spent several months in a remote community in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She was doing fieldwork for her sociology dissertation. Since she came back, she's been completely absorbed in her thesis, spending almost all her time locked away in her study. The house feels cold and empty, and I've been sitting alone at my desk, trying to figure out how to deal with the widening gap between us. I've made efforts to talk things through, but she seems determined to shut me out, and I'm running out of ways to bridge the distance. Let me give you some context about us. My name is Ethan Carter, and I work as a geologist specializing in oil exploration. I was recruited straight out of grad school. Olivia, my wife of 5 years, is an academic who's deeply passionate about her research and teaching. We met back in college in Austin and supported each other as we worked toward our master's degrees, mine in geology and hers in sociology. Though our careers have taken us down different paths, we've always been each other's biggest cheerleaders. But lately, it feels like something has changed. Olivia's research took her to a private community in Santa Fe to study a breakaway group of a church. What was originally supposed to be a 2-month trip stretched on much longer than planned. During that time, she barely contacted me. She claimed she didn't have access to phones or email, which honestly didn't sit well with me. When she finally returned home, she immediately buried herself in her study to focus on her thesis. Our conversations have dwindled to almost nothing. I've tried to reach out to her, but it feels like she's purposefully keeping me at a distance. I get that her work is important, but the way she's handling it is driving a wedge between us. Questions keep swirling in my head. How did Olivia gain the trust of such a private group? Did they even know she was studying them? I've asked her about it, but she refuses to talk about her research at all. I admire Olivia's dedication to her PhD, but her lack of communication since coming back has been deeply unsettling. When I brought up my concerns, she brushed them off, saying I just didn't understand how complicated her work is. This is the first time in our marriage that I feel like she's keeping something important from me. The tension between us keeps building. Olivia has grown more secretive, constantly saying everything will make sense once her thesis is finished. But that promise gives me little reassurance. Why can't she just share what's on her mind now? What's even more troubling is how much she's changed. She's abandoned her usual casual, modern outfits and now wears long, conservative dresses that cover her neck, knees, and ankles. She stopped wearing makeup, and her hair is always pulled back into a tight bun. When I asked her about it, she said dressing modestly helps her stay in the right mindset for her research. But even at home, she only wears plain nightgowns and has completely withdrawn from physical closeness, saying it would interfere with her focus. The emotional and physical distance between us has grown wider than ever. Her urgency to finish her thesis also feels strange. She still has 2 years to complete it, but she's determined to wrap it up early so she can start teaching high school in the fall. While her reasoning sort of makes sense, it doesn't align with her usual careful, methodical approach. We've always talked about big decisions like this as a team, but now she's making them entirely on her own. When I offered to help her search for teaching jobs, she flatly refused, saying she'd take care of it herself. It felt like another door closing, shutting me out of decisions that affect both of us. Although her health improved after a stomach infection she caught during her trip, our marriage seems to be getting worse. Our conversations are shallow at best, and Olivia refuses to coordinate her plans with mine, which has made it impossible for me to align my work trips with hers. I've been treading carefully, trying to give her space, but I feel like I'm being excluded from her life. This sense of isolation is suffocating me. My anxiety is even starting to take a physical toll. I've always relied on structure and predictability, but Olivia has turned our life into a string of unknowns. I can't escape the fear that she's slipping away, putting her academic goals above our relationship. In the evenings, I've tried to connect with her, asking how her research is going. But every time I bring up her time in Santa Fe, it leads to tension and arguments. She refuses to talk about it, insisting she won't discuss anything until her thesis is complete. Her silence only adds to my doubts. Our marriage, which was once filled with love and connection, feels like it's unraveling. We haven't been intimate since before her trip, and her explanation that physical contact might disrupt her focus leaves me questioning everything. How could being close to her own husband interfere with her work? The thought keeps haunting me. Has she broken our vows? Her refusal to have an open conversation only deepens my fears. Recently, she moved my workspace from the den to the dining room, locking me out of what was once a shared space. When I finally confronted her directly and asked if she'd been unfaithful, she became furious and defensive. She shut the conversation down, repeating that nothing could be discussed until her dissertation was done. It's painfully obvious that our relationship is in serious trouble. The stress is eating away at me, and I've started to dread coming home. Olivia doesn't feel like the same person anymore. Her degree seems to have consumed her entire life. The bond we used to share, full of joy and laughter, is crumbling, and I can't help but wonder if other couples go through this when one partner becomes consumed by work, school, or some other major commitment. Have you ever been in a situation like this, when it feels like your relationship is slipping away because one partner is completely caught up in something? If you've experienced anything like this, I'd love to hear your story or advice in the comments. It's hard right now, and hearing from others who've been through something similar could really help. Anyone else going through this? Olivia's obsession with meeting her self-imposed deadlines only made things worse. After one particularly heated argument, I finally hit my breaking point. "Olivia," I said sharply, "you've destroyed the trust and communication in our marriage. This relationship is falling apart, and it's because of you." My words came out harsher than I meant them to, but I couldn't hold back any longer. After releasing my frustration, I stormed out of the house and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head. As I drove, my mind spiraled. Olivia insisted she still loved me and hoped I felt the same, and I had told her I did. But how could I reconcile those words with the way she was treating me? She was shutting me out of important conversations about us, and it left me questioning her loyalty. The doubts were eating away at me. Had she crossed a line during her research? The constant uncertainty was too much, and I realized something had to change, whether it came from her actions or mine. For a moment, I considered leaving her and starting over, but the idea of life without Olivia was painful. Instead, I decided I needed to find answers, even if I had to get them on my own. I thought about reaching out to someone at her university who might know more about her situation. Looking back on everything, her sudden change in appearance, her rejection of physical intimacy, and her distant behavior, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. The woman I had fallen in love with now felt like a stranger, showing no interest in my feelings or the connection we once shared. Eventually, I started avoiding her entirely. This only made the distance between us grow even larger. Her habit of locking doors and password protecting her computer fed my suspicions. When I confronted her about it, she dismissed my concerns, telling me there was nothing to worry about. But her reassurances felt hollow. Olivia's secrecy was unlike anything I'd seen from her before. She wouldn't share even the simplest details about her research, claiming that doing so might disrupt her progress. When I told her how hurt and excluded I felt, she brushed it off like it wasn't important. One day, my boss noticed how distracted I'd become and suggested I talk to her thesis advisor. I decided to take his advice. At the same time, I quietly began searching for answers on my own. I checked our bank accounts first, but everything appeared normal. Feeling uneasy about digging deeper, I reached out to a tech-savvy friend for help. He agreed to help me access Olivia's computer when she wasn't around. My chance came when Olivia told me she had a meeting with her thesis committee the following Tuesday. I decided that would be my opportunity to find out the truth. When Tuesday arrived, Olivia showed no signs of change. She was still distant, her demeanor cold, and she continued wearing the oversized, conservative clothing that seemed meant to hide her figure. I reminded myself to stay calm, knowing I would have answers soon. At the same time, I realized I couldn't avoid a confrontation or the possibility of divorce for much longer. That same day, I met with Dr. Harrison, her thesis advisor, in his office at the Austin Research Institute. He was polite and confirmed that he was supervising her dissertation. He mentioned that Olivia had access to a research expense account but wasn't sure if she'd made any recent claims. His secretary later provided me with a detailed record of her expenses. When I asked about the sudden changes in her research focus, Dr. Harrison acknowledged them but said that Olivia should explain those herself. He mentioned that her project had undergone revisions but had the full support of the committee. He encouraged me to have an honest and heartfelt conversation with Olivia, emphasizing that forgiveness is vital in a marriage. While his advice was well-meaning, it only made me feel more uneasy. I also asked Dr. Harrison about how she stayed in touch during her fieldwork. He confirmed that Olivia used audio equipment to communicate with the committee, but when I inquired about her living arrangements during the trip, he said those details would be part of her final presentation and couldn't be discussed without her approval. When I mentioned that Olivia had specifically asked him not to share any details with me, he looked surprised, which only deepened my discomfort. As I left his office, Dr. Harrison's secretary handed me a file with Olivia's financial records. I decided to review them later, knowing they might hold the answers I desperately needed. On the drive home, my suspicions grew even stronger. My meeting with Dr. Harrison had done nothing to ease my concerns. While I still had no concrete evidence of infidelity, Olivia's continued secrecy raised countless red flags. I hid the file Dr. Harrison's secretary gave me in my desk and decided not to tell Olivia about the meeting. For the first time in our marriage, I was keeping something significant from her, and the guilt of that decision weighed heavily on me. That evening, the tension between us was palpable. I confronted her directly, telling her that her behavior was making me question her faithfulness. I warned her that if things didn't change soon, our marriage wouldn't survive. She grimaced, gave me a hollow smile, and once again promised to explain everything once her thesis was approved. On the day of her defense, Olivia chose one of her usual conservative outfits. I suggested that she dress up a bit for the occasion, but she dismissed the idea, saying her appearance didn't matter in her field. After she left for the defense, my tech-savvy friend arrived as planned. He quickly accessed her computer, copying all her emails, documents, and even deleted files. When he was done, he carefully erased any trace of our intrusion and advised me to store the backup somewhere safe. That afternoon, I rented a safety deposit box and locked the disks away, knowing that whatever was on them had the potential to completely shatter our marriage. That evening, Olivia came home in an unusually good mood. She had eaten dinner in the city and had called earlier to tell me to grab something for myself, so I picked up a burger. When she walked in, her energy was almost infectious. I asked her how her thesis critique had gone, and she smiled warmly. "It went better than I expected," she said, clearly thrilled. "My work has been approved for publication, and I'm almost done. I told you there wouldn't be any problems. See? I told you my dress didn't matter." My research spoke for itself. I congratulated her, genuinely happy for her accomplishment. But when I leaned in to hug and kiss her, she pulled back slightly. "I can't kiss you like we used to," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words confused me. "Your degree is secure now. Your research is done. Why can't we focus on our marriage again?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. She stepped back further and said quietly, "We can't go back." Her response hit me hard, and I could feel my frustration rising. "Does this mean our marriage is over?" I asked, my voice tense. She pleaded with me, asking for just one more week to handle grant finances and finalize graduation fees. Tired of her constant delays, I accused her of stalling and warned her that if she postponed this any further, I would have no choice but to consult a divorce lawyer. After another heated argument, I reluctantly agreed to give her the extra time she requested. That night was unbearable. I couldn't sleep, and it was clear Olivia was restless too. The next morning, something caught my eye that made my blood run cold. Her body looked different. There was a small bump on her stomach that hadn't been there before. Staring at it, the realization hit me like a punch to the gut: Olivia was pregnant. Given the timing, the baby couldn't possibly be mine. The truth crashed over me, and I was left horrified. She must have been pregnant before she came back home. Overwhelmed by anger, I shook Olivia awake violently. She screamed and tried to pull away, but I held her down. "You're pregnant with another man's baby," I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. "No more delays, Olivia. You're going to tell me everything right now." Still furious, I stormed out of the room and slammed the door behind me. I tried to calm myself with a cup of coffee, but the rage wouldn't go away. My hand clenched so tightly around the mug that it shattered, leaving glass scattered everywhere. This, I realized, might just be the worst day of my life. Later, I called Olivia to the table. She walked in nervously, still wearing one of her oversized outfits. I demanded that she wear something more fitting, but she quietly admitted that her old clothes no longer fit because of her pregnancy. Then she dropped a bombshell that left me completely frozen. She confessed that she had known about the pregnancy since she returned but hadn't been able to face it. Through tears, Olivia explained that the pregnancy was the result of something terrible. While she was away for her research, she had been assaulted. She revealed that she was coerced into a relationship with Samuel, the patriarch of the family she stayed with. He used his influence and control over the local authorities to trap her. What started as a forced encounter turned into repeated incidents, leaving her feeling completely powerless. She sobbed as she recounted what had happened, and as much as I wanted to hold on to my anger, it began to soften, replaced by disbelief and sorrow. "If you were assaulted, that changes everything," I said, my voice quieter now. "But it doesn't explain why you've been shutting me out or why you've kept all of this from me. Why all the secrecy? Why the distance? There has to be more to the story." "Keep talking," I told her. Although our marriage was still hanging by a thread, I was willing to listen. With tears streaming down her face, she said, "I'm trying, Ethan. This is so hard. I wanted to tell you everything, but I planned to do it in stages. You forced me to start now. Please, let me explain it all in order." I hesitated but eventually agreed. "Fine, but it all comes out today. No more waiting." She nodded, her face pale. "Yes, today. I'll tell you everything. I promise." Before she began, I decided to come clean myself. "I've already started investigating," I admitted. "I've spoken to your professor and copied everything from your computer. This is your chance to be completely honest with me." She nodded again, her expression strained. As I set up a tape recorder, turned off her phone, and prepared to hear the full story, Olivia began. "I grew up in one of those polygamous families," she began, her voice trembling. "My mother was the fourth wife in a household like the one I studied. When I was 11, she escaped with me. We fled in the middle of the night and eventually found refuge in Austin. That's where we rebuilt our lives, and I never talked about it until now." She paused, visibly drained, and asked for a break. For the first time since she came back, she reached out and held my hand. We went for a walk together, a brief moment of connection in the middle of all the chaos. When we returned, we sat down with some water and fruit, and she continued her story. "My childhood experiences shaped my academic interests," she explained. "I wanted to understand that world again but from an adult perspective. What I'm about to tell you will be even harder to hear, but I promise I'll be honest." She revealed that the family she stayed with was tied to her past. They had been suspicious of her intentions, but she convinced them that she was considering returning to their community permanently. Samuel, the head of the family, was a controlling man in his 50s who demanded absolute obedience. He made strict rules for me, including taking off my wedding ring, she said, her voice shaking. I had no choice but to comply. When he saw my backpack, I told him it held clothes, personal items, and my computer. He took it, smashed it with a hoe, and threw it away. He also confiscated my purse and the $1,000 I had inside, saying women weren't allowed to have money in his house. Luckily, I had hidden some cash near the bus station from the start. It was clear that I was more of a captive than a guest. I had to follow his rules if I wanted to complete my research. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Losing my computer was why I locked myself away when I returned home. I had to rebuild everything from memory, my notes, my emotional reactions, everything that was critical to my research. It was one of the most stressful experiences of my life, both during the trip and after. She took a deep breath and continued. I agreed to follow the community's rules because it aligned with my research goals. You might wonder why Samuel even let me stay, considering I was an outsider. The only reason was our family connection. He wasn't related to me by blood but through marriage. He's 20 years older than me and became the head of our family after my father died. Olivia hesitated before adding, when I arrived, they gave me a bed in the attic with the other wives. Samuel slept downstairs, and the children shared the attic space with us. I was expected to work, dress modestly, and follow the same rules as the other women. She paused, looking exhausted, before continuing. The first wife went through my suitcase and found my birth control pills. She threw them away, calling them unnatural and against God's will. Then she confiscated my underclothes and burned them, replacing them with plain white cotton garments. I didn't argue. I knew I had to follow their rules or leave. At the time, losing the pills didn't seem like a big deal since we weren't physically close, and I planned to start taking them again when I returned home. She looked down at her hands, her voice quieter now. I fell into their routine and gradually earned the wife's trust, which allowed me to gather critical data for my research. Without a diary, I had to rely entirely on memory, which is why I needed so much privacy when I came back home. As she spoke, I took notes, unsure how to process everything. Then her voice cracked, and she went on. During my second week there, Samuel declared that I would become his fourth wife. I was horrified and protested, but he didn't care that I was already married. He claimed that God had revealed to him that I was meant to be his. When I resisted, he became aggressive, dragging me to his bedroom. That night, he assaulted me, and I realized there was no way out. Her voice broke, tears spilling as she recounted the trauma. After that, he treated me like I was his wife, controlling, dominant, and relentless. Over time, I became submissive. I started to accept it. I began to distance myself from my life with you. She stopped, bracing herself, then admitted, the other wives had similar stories. They resisted at first but eventually adapted. After a few weeks, Samuel allowed me to visit other families, which gave me more opportunities to observe and take notes. By then, I had blended into the community. I even became a teacher, designing lesson plans that adhered to their strict beliefs. That role made me an important part of their world. Her tone softened, becoming almost fragile. One night, after a party for Samuel's daughter, I saw a chance to escape. I left a note, grabbed my hidden credit card, and retraced the route my mother and I had taken years earlier. After walking 8 miles, I finally reached the bus station, exhausted. I used the cash I'd hidden and made my way back home. The rest you know. I locked myself away to reconstruct my notes and process everything I had been through, especially the strain it put on us. Olivia sighed heavily, her weariness evident. That's why I needed so much privacy. I couldn't afford distractions, even intimacy with you. She hesitated, then said, this next part will be even harder to hear. Do you have any questions, or should I keep going? Feeling numb, I replied, just keep going. She nodded, her voice quieter now. I've been reflecting on the 2 worlds I've experienced, Olivia continued, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. They're so different, but each has its own advantages and drawbacks. To be honest, I found myself drawn to the simplicity of the rural, communal life. Even the idea of polygamy has its benefits, which I've explored in my thesis. I've also been working on a novel based on my experiences and already received a $50,000 advance. That's why I've been so busy these last few months. Anger surged in me, and I couldn't hold back. So the assaults don't bother you anymore? That's not just wrong, it's disgusting. She ignored my outburst and continued. I avoided intimacy with you because I needed to keep my memories of Samuel clear for my research. Then the pregnancy happened. Over time, I realized I was torn between two worlds and two men. With you, I had gentle, tender love. With Samuel, I experienced something different, submissive. Her calm, steady gaze unnerved me. Now that my thesis is done, I have to decide, do I stay with you, or go back to Samuel? I can't have both. If I return to Samuel, I'll be faithful to him and leave you behind. If I stay with you, you'll have to accept that I'm carrying his child. She raised her hand, showing me her wedding ring. I'm still wearing this because Samuel told me to keep it. He never gave me a new one. While things started with conflict, I eventually embraced that dynamic willingly. It was thrilling in a way I hadn't known. But now I have to choose, you or him. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. My thesis committee knows everything, including my experiences with Samuel. They know I'm pregnant, but it hasn't affected their assessment of my work. I'm ready to answer your questions. I just hope you'll remain as civil as I've been. I sat in stunned silence, her words hollowing me out slowly. My thoughts began to clear. I realized I didn't need the files from her computer or the financial records I gathered. The recording I had was more than enough. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to control my anger. You've shut me out of every major decision, I said coldly. You broke your vows to forsake all others, took another man as your lover, got pregnant, and destroyed our marriage. You excluded me from your life, and now there's no way to save our relationship. It's over. Olivia's face paled, but I wasn't finished. Your choices are simple. Go back to Samuel if he'll have you, or raise this child on your own. But you'll do it without me. I won't support you or this baby financially or emotionally. You tortured me for months, and now it's over. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with a divorce lawyer. You chose your research and betrayal over our marriage. Now live with the consequences. Her face hardened, but I didn't care anymore. This was the end. The next day, I closed our joint bank accounts, transferred the money into new ones, and cancelled our credit cards. At my lawyer's office, I made it clear, no alimony, no child support, and I demanded Olivia drop my last name. Her child wouldn't carry it either. I wouldn't let it be tarnished. My lawyer supported me, helping finalize the arrangements. Later, I visited Olivia's mother and shared the news. At first, she congratulated me, but as I explained Olivia's actions, her joy turned to heartbreak. She looked devastated, knowing her daughter had been pulled back into the life they had worked so hard to escape. On my boss's advice, I hired a powerful attorney to pressure Olivia's university. Within weeks, the board revoked her thesis and denied her degree, with no option for appeal. Her publisher froze her advance, and her grant funding was cut off entirely. Not long after, my lawyer informed me Olivia had signed the divorce papers without contest. She had lost everything, her career, her reputation, and our marriage. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved back to Santa Fe, presumably to be closer to Samuel and the community she had studied. I didn't know if she had gone back to him or if she was raising the child on her own. Part of me didn't want to know. The betrayal still felt raw, and I wasn't ready to confront the possibility of her being happy without me. Months passed, and I began to feel like I was finally starting to heal. I reconnected with old friends, took up hiking as a hobby, and even went on a few casual dates. None of them led to anything serious, but they reminded me that there was life beyond the wreckage of my marriage. I was slowly learning to trust again, though it wasn't easy. One day, out of the blue, I received a letter from Olivia. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a handwritten note, brief and to the point. Ethan, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing well. Olivia. I stared at the letter for a long time, emotions swirling inside me. Anger, sadness, regret, and even a flicker of relief that she had acknowledged the pain she caused. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. But her words stayed with me, a reminder of the life we once shared and the choices that had torn us apart. As time went on, I found myself thinking less and less about Olivia. The wounds she had left began to scar over, and I started to feel like myself again. I even met someone new, a colleague named Sophia, who shared my passion for geology and had a laugh that could light up a room. We took things slow, and for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. But just as I was beginning to move on, I received another letter. This one wasn't from Olivia. It was from a lawyer representing her estate. The letter informed me that Olivia had passed away. She had died in childbirth, leaving behind a newborn daughter. The lawyer explained that Olivia had named me as the child's legal guardian in her will. I was stunned. My mind raced as I tried to process the news. Olivia was gone. And now, I was responsible for a child who wasn't even mine. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to refuse, to walk away and leave the past behind. But another part of me couldn't ignore the fact that this child was innocent in all of this. She deserved a chance at a good life, even if her parents' story was a tragic one. After much deliberation, I decided to take on the responsibility. I flew to Santa Fe to meet the baby and make arrangements to bring her home. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt a mix of emotions: grief for Olivia, uncertainty about the future, and a strange sense of protectiveness over this tiny, helpless life. I named her Lily, after my grandmother. Raising her hasn't been easy, but it's given me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. She's a constant reminder of the past, but also a symbol of hope for the future. I don't know what lies ahead for us, but I'm determined to give her the love and stability she deserves. As for Olivia, I've made my peace with her memory. I'll never fully understand the choices she made, but I've come to accept that life is messy and complicated. People make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes have far-reaching consequences. All I can do now is focus on the present and do my best to build a better future for Lily and for myself.